5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
You're listening to Tabletop and Beyond with your host, Justin.
But before we get started, how was your Geek Week?
And co-hosts Dan and Jason.
You have to be willing to let the dice help you tell the story.
Okay, look, this year I'm going to stop mispronouncing words. Join us as we cover board games to war games and beyond.
And welcome back to Tabletop and Beyond. I'm your host, Justin, and Dan, you're here with me tonight.
What?
I know, right?
What? Where am I? Will you take me home? Sorry, I wandered into your podcast. Just excuse me. I'll just be on my way. I'm very sorry.
Well, welcome back. It feels like it's been a minute, but that's just because we've been recording some other shows, and you've been doing your thing, and it's all good, though.
You record things without me, don't you? You don't want to record with me like you used to.
Listen, you're always welcome to come and talk Warhammer with us, but I have a feeling that it may not be your gig.
I do a lot of pensive listening, and I'm thinking about it and I'm processing it. But some of those episodes are better for me as a listener than I am as a, than participating as a co-host. So great stuff. I listen to every show and can't wait to hear more.
We are very fortunate. I think I've mentioned this on the Talking Warhammer segment of our show that here in Northern Virginia, we've made some. I've made some good connections with some of the most competitive wargamers in the Age of Sigmar kind of game.
Right.
So one of them was on the show last week, Sergio Ortiz, and I played against him multiple times. And he just got selected to be on the practice squad for Team America that will go to the European Team Championships.
Well, that's cool.
Yeah, it's a pretty big deal. So he's I think he may get selected as like an alternate to get in at one point. So I think that's really great.
He made the list. That's fantastic. Good for him.
Yeah, exactly.
We wish him all the best.
Well, we're missing Jason this week. He's out getting wined and dined and schmoozed, unlike the rest of us suckers.
Yeah.
So
yeah. I had sloppy joes tonight, so there was no whining, dining, nor schmoozing, but the slop and the joe.
I just had tacos, and it's a good night when you have tacos.
Yeah, the difference between a sloppy joe and a taco is largely the carb that you put around it, and the other toppings.
That is true. Well, we have a good show for you guys tonight. This show is being prompted by the release of X-Wing edition 2.5, and we're going to get into that a little bit, but the topic of tonight's show is why do war games need new editions?
Yeah.
And we've put together pretty good stuff. Dan's done some historical research, and I think that we've got, some experience that we can talk about the necessity of new editions in wargaming. But before we get there, Dan, how was your Geek Week?
Well, you guys haven't seen me for a while, so I've got a pile of geek stuff, but I'm just going to do the tippy top, the top things that came to mind. So last Saturday, I got my son because for his grades, I owed him some allowance, and I got him a Rubik's Cube on
nice.
Saturday. And so by Sunday afternoon, this thing was very randomized. Let me say, he's 9 years old, and he's just, he's not a boy who is good with frustration. He is not chill, right? He gets frustrated, and I'm obsessive. So around the time he decided to just chuck it behind himself and go watch a movie, I decided to go on YouTube and learn how to really solve Rubik's Cubes. Like
nice.
solve it like the professionals solve it, the guys who compete. And so the competition is not about how you solve it, it's about how fast you solve it.
Exactly.
And so what I had to learn was all of the algorithms and strategies to get to, solving, one face, then a bottom layer, then a middle layer, then a top face, then top layer, and the whole thing is solved. It's an 8-step process. and you have to learn these hand motions to make it fast, and you have to learn notation for cubes, like where you do a rotate. Do you do it clockwise, counterclockwise, top, bottom, left, right, all that stuff. And combos. You have to learn like a right hand trigger combo and a left hand trigger combo. All this stuff is like way important. And the weird thing about it is I don't understand how the algorithms work, but they do work. So if you follow them meticulously, you look down at it and suddenly you're like, bam, oh, that just fixed itself. I have no idea how I did that. So it's fascinating. I was really fascinated by cubing, Rubik's cubing. I think puzzling is part of the gamer world that we almost never talk about. But I'll tell you what, it really taxed my brain, and I spent a lot of time on a Wired YouTube video that was about 20 minutes on cubing. And I spent at least, it was about 2.5 hours. I start and stopped. But I had to put in a lot of hours to get that first cube solved. I had to teach myself all that stuff. So it was super nerdy and super fun.
I was in a pretty stressful job for a little while back around, oh man, this was in 2007, and we were working in a bullpen area, so there was like 6 of us in this kind of open space. We all had our own little cubes, but no walls in between us, right? Just like a table in the middle, like kind of a common area type thing. And we had a whole bunch of different puzzles there on the table that when you just needed a little bit of a break, you could go over and mess around with. And one of them was the Rubik's Cube. And one of the guys there knew how to do it. So he taught me how to do it. And I got to the point where I was solving it in like 2 minutes or something like that.
Man.
You know? Like super fast. But you give it to me now, and I've forgotten, like, I can get it to the point where I need a little bit of help on the moves on the bottom layer.
Yeah.
Right?
Did you do the white lily, white cross strategy?
I don't think I knew the names of the strategies. He just told me, and there's something to deal with like a fisheye.
Yes, you got to get to the fish, yeah.
Yeah, so I was at, the fish, and like I can get it to that point, and then after that, like I have forgotten because I have not kept up my Rubik's cubing since then. So
I'm serious. These algorithms, they were 9-10 step algorithms. You had to do them perfectly. You had to execute each algorithm perfectly, or you messed up the whole thing, and you started back from the beginning.
Right.
Because in order to make progress, you have to mess up the stuff that you accomplished, fixed one thing, and then put everything back together.
Yep.
Over and over and over and over again. And the funny thing about these algorithms is that they work no matter the conditions, because they're bulletproof algorithms for these puzzles. You just have to apply the right algorithm to the right problem, and it solves itself. That's why these guys can just do it so fast. It's crazy. So I'm good for you for being a 2-minute guy. My gosh. So I confidently handed the Rubik's Cube back to my son this morning, and I'm like, mess it up all you want. I can fix it. Now, in the 80s, I was a kid. These were a big deal in the 80s. It was a real huge fad. I remember pulling stickers off, moving stickers around. We would take the pieces out and reconfigure it, and we had all these cheats that were always horrible. It defeated the purpose of the entire
pre YouTube, right? Where where you could look it up and be like, oh, so that's how you do it. I noticed. I think I got a Rubik's Cube for my son one time, and I noticed that there was instructions on how to solve it.
Oh, really?
In the packaging, yeah.
Yeah. I didn't get that far. Me and YouTube. Anyway, enough on that. It's way more fascinating than I ever imagined. So give it a go. If it's a solitary thing too. It's solitaire. So you don't. It's fun about that. Okay, so a few weeks back, I played Alien Artifacts with Jason and Sean. Alien Artifacts is a card game that's supposed to take about an hour. It's about building ships, developing technology, exploring and exploiting planets in your empire. A couple of things that popped out at me about this game. First of all, it was fun. I had a great time. It was just a good game and enjoyable, and everybody else who played enjoyed it. The other two guys. The one thing is there's this factor when you play a game and you learn it for the first time and you win it. It gets like a halo effect in your brain.
Oh,
so
yeah. Okay.
I won, so I'm like, yeah, that game is amazing. I would love to play that again. But I won mainly because it was new to all of us and we had misinterpreted one rule, or I'd forgotten to read one phrase in one card and made some false assumptions, right? And which worked out in my favor. And it was really getting under Jay's skin. He really wants a rematch. So
he didn't mention that last podcast, by the way.
No, we got a lot going on. That recording, when he posts on YouTube for our listeners, that will be. I was in the recording session where we put down we had the cards set out, and what he'll do is it's not, you don't watch our gameplay. He just uses the setup to explain the game and explain what he liked about it and stuff like that. So
nice.
It's a good game. Another interesting thing about that is board game depreciation. That game came out in 2017. I've been noticing a pattern with games that are 4, 5, 6 years old that maybe were overstocked and are sitting in inventories, aren't moving. And I think there's an interesting conversation to be had about, we tend to, sometimes we chase the latest hotness of the latest board game and go, oh, it just came out, the latest Kickstarter, the latest.
Right.
I'm one of these guys. I like a value. I like getting some value out of a game. I'd rather pay $50 than $100. I did that with CMON over the holidays. There was a CMON sale. And I think this is another topic maybe for another game, is to talk another day, is to talk about board game depreciation. And when's the right time to jump in on a game to stretch out your buck? Because nobody should buy every game all the time. That's ridiculous. But you should get what you want.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of interesting because I think it'll depend on the game, right? Like, for example, if you go to buy Puerto Rico, I think that's still sitting at $29, and it has for the last 10 years. You know what I mean?
Uh-huh.
But I do think it's interesting how it's easy in the world of $100 to $200 board games that we're seeing. Right, like you can't get Gloomhaven for less than $100, and you can't get some of these CMON games right out of the gate for less than $150, $200. And let's not talk about Games Workshop games, right? So
they're in another league.
Yeah, you're talking, triple digits for some of these board games. So a $30 for a Puerto Rico is like, that seems reasonable, right?
Yeah.
But some of these games might just be overpriced because the market is a little inflated due to hype.
Yeah, the hype and they printed a lot of them and everybody bought it, but it didn't necessarily take off the way they thought it would. But the different game shops bought too many of them 5 years ago, and now they're looking at back inventory, going, we should liquidate some of this stuff so we don't take it as a loss year after year after year after year. Anyway,
I wonder if they are because Jason bought this game for like $20 or something like that.
Yeah,
right?
But it MSRP'd way higher than that when it came out.
Like he said, it fit for 40 something.
Yeah, so it's lost half its value in 5 years.
Do you think that like the he bought it at Second Charles? Do you think Second and Charles still made a little profit off of that?
I would expect yes. They're in business for business, right? So
you would expect that, but
I would
if
make
they're
that,
like, we just got to get this off the shelves.
If they bought it kind of like like a Marshalls or a Ross Dress for Less situation, where they just take a pallet of something that didn't sell, and now it's still marked down off of MSRP, but they bought it for pennies on the dollar.
Right.
That's a thing. I mean.
Yeah,
Alien Artifacts right now is on Amazon for $24. I don't know what the MSRP was, but it's an interesting problem because a very popular game with lots of hype will have a decent price, and it won't depreciate that much. But maybe a B or C tier title that might just be the same amount of fun, you'll see some depreciation, and then they'll disappear completely and they'll go out of print.
Right.
See our other episode on dead games. So we spent a lot of time on that one. So anyway, interesting talk. So I kind of like a 5-year-old game right now. If the art's good and the gameplay's fun, I'm kind of sold.
I mean, if you hadn't been hyped up for it in 2017, and you're just now discovering it, it's as if it's a brand new game to you anyway.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
So,
well, that's me with Moloch,
Yeah.
the smog thing. Still haven't played it yet, and I've got another expansion coming in the mail.
nice.
So I'm 2 expansions and the core game. Never played it, but I have used the minis in RPGs. So
Oh, very good. Yeah.
so ding.
Yeah. Win-win.
Got a little bit of money's worth, but I'll play it. I'll get into it.
We need to do a review on it. Is what we need to do.
That's on my list. It's on our list.
Yep.
It's a calendaring problem. It's a when problem, not an if. It's a when.
Definitely.
All right. That was my very long geek week, but considering that Jason's not here, I think we're okay.
Well, I'm going to spare you guys from the painting update, which I did do some, but I'll say that for another day.
I have a bone to pick with you.
Oh, what's that?
About painting.
Oh no.
Remember when it was really cold, right? And
Yeah.
I was like, hey, and I went on our Discord and I was like, hey, is there good rattle can primer out there that people use? And you're like, don't use rattle can primer. It's too cold. Don't use it.
Yeah.
Come over to my house and we'll prime. And I'm like, I have hundreds of minis to prime. He's like, and you're like, don't bring them all. And I never came over because scheduling is hard, as
That's
we've
true.
just identified.
That's true.
And now the weather's warming up, and I still don't know what good rattle can primer to get for all these minis. Because the barrier of entry between buying a rattle can or buying an airbrush is kind of night and day difference. It's like,
It is.
A
I
can
will
of
send you a video. So Vince Venturella did a video on like how to best rattle can
Yeah.
prime your minis, and it's not only like what are the best cans to use, but
Yes.
how to do it, because it is
He's
too
good.
easy.
He's good. He's really good. I like
Yeah,
it.
and it's too easy to clog all the little details with a rattle can, because you can easily like spray them too close, and all of a sudden you got like primer just dripping down your minis.
Yeah.
And that's the problem. So I'll send you the video of his. It was an excellent video on priming, like really good. So
Maybe you already sent that to me, and if you did, I apologize.
I don't think I did. I don't think I did. In fact, I think it came out after our conversation, and I thought about it like, hey, Dan would really like this, but then I forgot about it.
And
so.
it's not that I'm opposed to coming to your house with all my minis. It's just working in
Time.
like, it's like, hey, if I have 30 minutes or an hour free and it's warm and there, it's not that windy outside and it's sunny, I can go out on a piece of cardboard and prime 100 minis and call it good. And I can do that like at will without planning. Otherwise, it's like, what would I take over to Justin's? Which one should I prioritize?
Right.
Which ones do I actually want to paint? Which one should, that whole thing. So that's why I haven't. But you were very generous to offer. So you were talking about painting in your Geek Week, and I interrupted you with my bone to pick.
Well,
So
I was
apologize.
going to say that I'm not going to talk about painting in my Geek Week.
But we did talk about painting because the barrier of entry for non-painters is raised by guys like you that's like, don't do that. Do the hard thing. And I'm like, I don't want to do the hard thing. I want to do the easy thing.
I know. Sometimes we make it harder than it is. But the thing is I have a couple of minis, the D&D minis, that I overprimed and just kind of wrecked some details on them. So with a rattle can. So
I mean, how much?
I've been there.
You don't really need to fully cover everything with primer. If you just hit, if it's 80% covered, who cares?
Yeah, I think it depends on the miniature itself. Like if it's resin, then you really need to like cover it all. You know what I mean?
Yeah. These are all just plastic.
Yeah, and if it's hard plastic, less so. Yeah. And the key will be, honestly, at the end is trying to get oh my gosh, the word, I cannot believe the word just the word resin's in my head. It's the spray coating that seals it.
Yeah.
So you just do like a sealer over it, and there's a word out there that everyone's
like
gonna laugh at me.
Or
It's not a lacquer because that's like for wood. It's
for wood.
Oh my gosh.
We
anyway,
sound stupid right now.
It'll come to me
It'll
like
come
in 5
back,
minutes.
and
I'm
we-
gonna start shouting it.
We're
but
going to
anyway,
edit all this out.
if you just spray that over it, and they have some spray cans of those too,
Yeah.
then it seals all the painting in, and it makes them hard. It doesn't get your oils on the fingers, and then the paint doesn't come off. So, the point is that, if you don't get it 100% covered with primer, then it'll probably be okay because you're going to seal it up.
Seal it, yeah.
Anyway, so, yeah.
I do
Anyway.
want to start. I just don't want to buy an airbrush setup because I don't want the wife aggro.
Yeah. Yeah. I hear you.
All right, I'll stop I've been taking over your Geek Week.
No, it's all good. It's all good. So, I mean, my Geek Week was pretty simple. So, I've been doing a lot of planning for our website lately. I've been going together with Dan Herrera and Jason, and we've been mapping out like what we want on the Warcry section of the site. I think we're really excited about some of the content we're bringing. The interesting thing about Warcry is there's not a lot of like web content out there for Warcry.
See?
And what is out there is good, and it's like a good summary of, like what units there are, like what some of the strategies are and things like that. But it's just really hard to read. Like, they're on websites that are just like not laid out very well, and apologies to if I'm offending your website, but it's just like you pull it up on mobile and your phone gets attacked with ads. Yeah. And you can't even see like the text because there's so many ads pop, and you're just like, like what kind of website is going on here, And so we came up with like I think a layout that's going to be pretty good. It's kind of like taking a baseball card philosophy with each of these war bands. Nice. And having like consistency across where you can like pull it up, get all the information you need at a pretty quick glance to understand what the army is, and then underneath that you've got more like in-depth articles about their strategies and strengths and weaknesses and stuff like that, so that you can compare like apples to apples, figure out what kind of warband you want to do, and then kind of dive in after that, So I think we're trying to make our website a little bit of a differentiator in terms of accessing the content for Warcry. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Just easy to read, easy to get to. So we've been planning that out. I've been doing obviously some editing. Finished up the Book of Boba Fett watch party stuff on there. Woohoo. So thank you for writing those up, Dan. I apologize for sitting on them for a little bit. I didn't realize I had them in my inbox, and that was all.
No problem.
The point is that's done, and I know that the new season of Picard is coming out, and that you're planning to review that, I think, once it all comes out, right?
We will check it out.
Okay.
I'm not sure yet. I will be watching it. It's just a matter of when. I think Paramount Plus right now has a coupon. I think it expires today, in fact, so I might, right after the podcast, take a quick look, see if I can just grab it. But, some of those shows need to just be watched all at once. I can't, with Star Wars, I just can't help myself. I have to watch it as soon as it comes out that day. I'm just chomping at the bit. Trek, I can kind of drag my feet a little bit. I used to be a huge Discovery fan, and I've totally lost all my enthusiasm for Discovery. So it's been going for season 4, and I have not been.
Yeah,
considering I was word of mouthing that show for a long time, and then it decided to tank, and I'm like, well, gosh, I'm sure glad I was word of mouthing this show.
I know, right?
Ugh. Don't watch it now.
Yeah. So the other thing that happened this week is really kind of cool. We had put out a game review of the Call of Cthulhu starter set, and put that up on YouTube, and I decided to reach out to Chaosium, the company that handles Call of Cthulhu. They do a lot of other RPGs as well. Some of them are kind of known. They're kind of quirky ones. Like, they have like Pendragon, which is like Knights of the Round Table.
Yep.
And their other big one besides Call of Cthulhu is RuneQuest. And what Jason and I didn't know is that RuneQuest was actually first published in like 1975. Like, it was first written in like the late 60s.
It's old school. Yeah,
it's very old school.
It's right along with D&D. It was one of the first. Right now we think of Paizo stuff as being the alternative, right?
Yep.
What's their game again?
It's Pathfinder.
Pathfinder, sorry.
Yeah.
We are losing it tonight, folks.
Pathfinder and Starfinder.
Yeah.
Enamel. Enamel is what the word is.
But
you can spray enamel.
I remember in the 80s, exactly, enamel. Thank you, guys. Thank you, universe.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Enamel. We're the worst. We're getting old. We're getting old. Don't get old, people. Stay young forever. Forever young. Long story short, I remember RuneQuest being, it was like, well, are you going to play D&D or are you going to play RuneQuest? And I remember when we got a role-playing game under the Christmas tree, it was not either of those two. It was Powers and Perils, which was a horrible, horrible game. We didn't get D&D, and we didn't get RuneQuest. We got Powers and Perils. So, wah, wah. But yeah, I remember that. I remember being in game stores and seeing a lot of that stuff and going, wow, this is... If you're not doing D&D, you could be doing RuneQuest.
So we reached out to Chaosium and we said, hey, we just did a review of Call of Cthulhu, your starter set, and we would really like to review anything else you'd like to send us and, get some people on the podcast. And almost immediately we said, I got a response saying, hey, thank you so much for, reviewing Call of Cthulhu. Would you like to do RuneQuest?
Cool.
And they said, we'll send you the starter kit for free to check out and to do a review. And I said, yes, please. So literally within minutes, I had a shipping notification for the starter set coming to me. But what's even cooler is they gave us access to some downloadable PDFs to get started on the reading and the rules and stuff like that. So it's going to be awesome. I can't wait to do a review of this. And, of course, to do a proper review, we need to run a session or two with it. So I'm looking forward to, within the next month, running a session of RuneQuest just to try it out and see what it is. This is not the 1976 edition of the game. Obviously, it's the latest edition that they have. I'm not sure exactly when this one was put out, but it's fairly recent, I think within the last few years. So, but it looks like a lot of fun. It looks really interesting.
I'm really excited that you're working with Chaosium. One of the things I haven't mentioned in the news, but I'll give Chaosium a shout out. They're one of the game companies that is donating proceeds from Call of Cthulhu Pay What You Want adventure. They're donating their proceeds to Ukrainian refugees.
Oh, nice.
International Committee of the Red Cross, United Nations Refugee Committee, Save the Children, and Doctors Without Borders. And the adventure is Does Love Forgive for Call of Cthulhu Pay As You Want. And that can be found on DriveThruRPG.
Awesome. So, we'll put a link out there for that too.
Yeah, they don't have to do that, and that's very cool that they are. So, yeah. So if you're a Call of Cthulhu fan and you want to plunk down some cash for an adventure, you will be helping folks who need help.
And there's a lot of high praise for those Call of Cthulhu adventures out there. By the way, a lot of them are very well written by big fans of H.P. Lovecraft and the horror, genre.
And they're hard to write, right? It's much easier to write blast stormtroopers, blow up the Star Destroyer than it is how do I drive the players insane? I mean, that's way more difficult.
Well, and it's how do I write a mystery? Really,
an excellent mystery.
A real honest-to-goodness mystery. Not just like, hey, this is a weird thing that happened along the way to you killing the bad guy, you know?
Yeah, it's like hack and slash clue, hack and slash clue, hack and slash cool. Clue. Yeah.
So, but no, those adventures are a lot of fun and fantastic. So I'm excited to be kind of working with Chaosium a little bit, and we're hoping to get some of their writers or game developers and stuff like that on the show at some point. So
wonderful.
I think that'd be really good.
I'm a huge fan. I think we talked about how we may have an open game night with no game, that we have some players with no game and a place to game. In my place, maybe we can make something work.
I think that would be amazing. So, but yeah, that was my Geek Week. Just kind of doing a lot of stuff for the website, tabletopandbeyond.com. If you haven't visited it, we got a bunch of stuff going up all the time. So, and of course, if you are listening, if you need a place to listen to podcasts, which is kind of weird because you're probably already listening to the podcast right now, but if you need another place to listen to it, you can always get that off of our front page as well. So,
yeah. Well, good sometimes, times. That you've got your phone or you're at work and you're on a, PC or a laptop with your headphones, and sometimes it's easier to go to a web page than it is to hook up your phone while you're working.
Well, I'll tell you this much. I am often at my client's computer system, and I cannot download Spotify
Ooh, yeah.
onto that system because they don't let me download outside software, which, I mean, makes sense, right?
Yeah,
It's their computer,
yeah.
their rules. But I can't download Spotify, and you can't listen to Spotify unless you have it downloaded. They don't have a web browser that they have, so listening to it from my web browser is one of the better options.
Nice.
Yeah.
It has been for me too. I've often worked in limited environments. So
Yeah, very good. So, all right, Dan, what kind of geek news we got this week?
alrighty, come on. Welcome to Tabletop and Beyond News.
I missed this, Dan.
I did too. I don't know why. It's probably one of the most narcissistic things I do. All right, Cubicle 7. Cubicle 7, another great RPG and board game producer, announced a new iteration of their Doctor Who role-playing game line,
Oh.
Doctors and Daleks Player's Guide using the 5e rule system. So,
Wow. Okay.
this is for some folks who are into the Whovian universe and maybe they know the 5e system real well and they want to jump right in. Look for that from Cubicle 7. They will Cubicle 7 will continue to produce their other Doctor Who content using a custom rule system for Doctor Who, but they've also been porting over to 5e, indicating yet another trend of IPs being skinned for the 5e rules engine.
And I think you said that it's our custom roll system, right? Isn't that the D100 system that they have with like some of their other stuff?
That rings a bell. I don't want to talk out of school. I would have to double check before I gave you a yes or no. I've not played this game, but I know people who have, and they say it's great. So I'm not. I'm too behind on Doctor Who to really get into it.
Yeah.
So, but I'm Who friendly. I'm Who compatible.
There you go. You're a Whovian.
I'm not a Whovian.
Okay.
I'm Who adjacent.
That's right. Okay.
Our
Fair
next item of news. ICO Partners announced that 2021 was yet again a year of net growth for tabletop games on Kickstarter, both in raw numbers of projects funded, but also in the total amount of money raised by the projects. So the year-on-year growth for 2020 was 33%. It had grown from the year before, and then it grow in 2021. It grew by 13%, which was less, and now in 2022 we're up to about 17%. So things are growing, and that's good. We're doing better than 21, but we're still not where we were in 2020.
So I've got two thoughts about this.
Yep.
One, 2020 was a very weird year where we had no idea if we're going to be staying in stores forever, right? So I wonder if people were like, well, might as well buy a board game since I'm just sitting here, you know?
Yeah.
And even though like those board games may not be fulfilled until 2021 or whatever, like that was a pretty good year for, I think, online shopping. 2020 was.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So there's that thought right there of why 2020 was the biggest one. But it makes me wonder, too, what is the supply chain's impact on funding numbers here? You know, I know we're having year-over-year growth. I know we're seeing, you know, the raw number of projects also go up. So, you know, just there's more on there. But, like, you know, a game that was maybe $100 in 2020, is it now like $125 in 2022, $150? Because I think, you know, like the shipping and printing stuff, like it has gone crazy expensive.
Yeah.
Like in the last 4 years, like crazy expensive.
So,
And this was happening before 2020, by the way. I remember when Rob Schwab was talking about his Kickstarter that came out in 2019. What was that when we went to a Catacon? Was 2019?
Yep, I think that's right.
Yeah. So he was talking about his Kickstarter, and he talked about how like the cost of printing and shipping went up so crazy high that he's like, I'm not gonna do as well as I thought I was on this project. You know, just because like from the time he put it in there to the time like actual shipping came up, like it was much more expensive than he thought. So, yeah, I wonder if they're building those costs in a little bit more.
Yeah, I definitely would say that the dip between the years, the one year and the other year, had to have been the supply line tie-up in China. There's just no two ways around it.
Right.
Kickstarter, the economies of scale don't work for indie game publishers without Chinese publishing houses. So when the boats slow down and people don't want to put money on Kickstarters like they did because they don't want to wait as many years to get their product, it's gonna have a cooling effect. Now, let's be honest. For this period of time that they assessed, over half of all funded projects were under $10,000, and
interesting.
And projects funding for less than $500,000 accounted for over $100 million of the total funding.
Wow.
At the same time, the big projects that funded over $500,000, they hit a all-time high with 101 projects. So there were 101 game projects that raised over $500,000 each.
One thing I noticed was that some of these bigger ones, like Mythic Games and CMON and stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
They expanded a lot of their IPs during this time, right? Like, because like Cool Means or Not, like Zombicide's like their big thing, and of course they were putting out Zombicide stuff, but then they like hit into the Marvel stuff. They started hitting into other big stuff, So
yeah,
like they their IP started blowing up to where I think they had a lot more recognizable names, like the Song of Ice and Fire,
right?
Came out in 2019, I think, for them.
Well, you can't buy a license with nothing.
Right.
So if you have cash in the bank and you're like, well, I could go buy a fishing license, a license to hunt, and go hunt me a deer, and then I'll have a deer. But if I can't pay for the deer hunting license, I can't get the deer.
Right.
So that's what a lot of that is. And Marvel seems to be like the sluttiest IP. Anybody can go make a Marvel game.
Anybody can go make a Marvel thing. Welcome to the multiverse, right?
All you have to do is lift your pant leg above your ankle and go, I want to make a Marvel board game. And they'll go, we'll sell you a license.
Right.
So, I'm sorry. I'm throwing shade at all the bizarre levels of Marvel stuff out there.
There's so many.
So, anyway, interesting stuff. Kickstarter.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
Board gaming in Kickstarter is alive and well. It's still huge money. And it's still, like I think we had said at one point in time, we had looked at the numbers, and board games accounted for over half of all the money that goes through Kickstarter is on board games.
So one thing that I don't think we've talked about on here, I noticed like maybe about a month ago, maybe a month and a half ago, there was kind of a big dust up on Twitter over Kickstarter because they were moving to the blockchain.
Yeah, that's a thing.
And so a lot of people are like, oh, we hate it for the environment and all this stuff, So I was starting to see a bunch of games being listed on GameFound, which is like a rival to Kickstarter.
Yeah.
And,
so they're
I don't know how big they are, but they're there.
Yes, certainly. GameFound,
and they seem to cater towards board games specifically. I mean, like they've got other games, but like board games is like their jam.
And Ravensburger just gave a whole bunch of money to GameFound. So
interesting.
But I don't know. I look at all this stuff and I think a rising tide lifts all boats.
Sure. Yeah.
If there's enough money for Kickstarter to be rolling around in Scrooge McDuck money, there's room for 2 or 3 other competitors to come in and create some efficiencies through competition.
Yeah.
That's
definitely.
not that big of a deal. Yeah.
Right.
That doesn't keep me up at night. Maybe other people it does, not me.
Yeah.
Next news item is PC Gamer reports that Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance 2 is coming to PC this year. Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance 2 came out on ye olde PlayStation 2 and original Xbox back in 2004.
Well, I'm glad it's coming out 18 years later on the PC.
No, they're reskinning it, right? This is one of those. If you take a classic, it's like remixing a classic track, right? It's like, okay, well, this was originally mixed in mono, and then in the 80s they remixed it in stereo, and now they're taking Beatles music and remixing it in Dolby Atmos, and it's just another way to enjoy that content. Sometimes the games are worth remixing, right? If the story's good and the acting's good and the gameplay is fun, heck, why not? No, the worst thing is trying to play a game is good and looking at the graphics and having that take away from the experience.
Yeah. Funny story about this game in particular. I had a good friend that I knew in Utah when I was going to school there, and he lived like kitty corner from me, right? And I found out that he likes playing video games, and I had a PlayStation 2, and I think he had a PlayStation 2, and so I got this game, and we would play. This was like a 2-player co-op, like Diablo style game that we would play, and we would play this thing, and we'd play for hours and hours and hours, and just let our wives just kind of yammer on about whatever they were talking about in the kitchen. And we would just play and play and play, and we loved playing it. We had a good time, and we'd always get to like near the end, and then we were like, okay, all right, we gotta stop. It's too late. Let's pick it up next weekend or whatever. Well, in between them, I'd always start a new game and somehow overwrite our game. Like, this happened like 3 times, Dan. 3 times. To the point where he's like, I'm not playing this game with you anymore.
You
like,
jerk.
So we never finished it. We never finished the game.
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah, the first time, it's a fair mistake. The third time, we're like, dude, we're doing something else.
Yeah.
That's
yeah.
funny.
So,
I didn't
we had a
mean
good
to,
time with it.
I didn't mean to trigger a dark memory.
Yeah, it was, it's fine. It's fine. I think if I called him up today, he'd probably still say I'm still not playing that with you.
But it's gonna come out for PC, and you guys can play it again. It'll be so great.
Exactly.
And the graphics will be modern graphics. All right, Board Game Geek reports that after releasing a revamped version of Dune in 2019, that was the oldie 1980s version of Dune, they re-released in 2019. And the scaled-down Dune, a game of conquest and diplomacy in 2021, publisher Gale Force 9 plans to release its third Dune title in June of 2022 with Arrakis Dawn of the Fremen.
Ooh, that sounds promising.
Well, it's a different kind of Dune game. So Arrakis Dawn of the Fremen is set more than 100 generations before the Atreides came to Arrakis. And the game focuses on the hard choices Fremen leaders made when bargaining, cooperating, and competing in the harsh Arrakis environment to gain and protect scarce resources and create the communal cave dwellings they call sieges. So everybody is a Fremen, and you have a tribe, and you're all scraping it out, trying to keep your tribe alive and coexist with the worm, with Shai Hulud.
So let the spice flow, right? Part of me is like the Dune that Denis Villeneuve did was absolutely amazing, and I think that we're seeing like the fallout's the wrong word, right? The consequences, the beneficial consequences of this, which is like like a lot of these games could be skinned as something else, but now they're going to get the Dune skin on it.
Maybe Halo effect.
Yeah.
It's like,
exactly.
Well, do we need another Dune game? Well, we have a game engine and it's fun. And if we just dropped it on Arrakis 1,000 years before the movie, then we've got a game.
Because you could make this about cavemen in Africa or something like this, right? Or like, some sort of, Celtic feudal system. It could be all the same things with the skin, but drop the Dune IP on it, and we've talked about IPs and stuff like that before, but it's interesting to see like that there are all of these games that are either getting new additions for, right, or kind of being skinned in Dune.
This
So,
one is based on the game Borderlands, right? Which
okay.
is about barbarians. Barbarian leaders of the far future deal in diplomacy, treachery, and development. So it's kind of like post-apocalyptic
Yeah.
barbarians. But anyway, if it's a good game, it's a good game. The thing that is interesting to me is because I read the super prequels, the ones like 1,000 years before the main events of the movie, like the
Yeah.
Butlerian Jihad, where they actually
Right.
show the founding of the Fremen. It's like I would be playing the game with that pair of eyes. I'd be like, so are we connecting this back up to that era of Dune? Because there's three 400-page novels covering that period.
Right.
So, so that's, I would wonder if Gale Force 9 cared about that. That would be my angle on it. I'd be like, so do you really care about the lore, or is this just an art project?
Or they're just like, okay, well, we know that we can't put it in the modern thing because, the Atreides showed up. So how about if we go spins a dial 300 years in the past?
Well, and if you look at what Gale, if you look on, I'm on Board Game Geek, and I can see the front cover of it. It does have the Dune logo from the last film, and it has the legendary film logo. So this is definitely a film tie-in game. So
Right.
they're tying it to the film, maybe not so much to the Brian Herbert, Kevin J. Anderson novels, which I think were very good and underrated in my humble
Totally
opinion.
underrated. Totally underrated.
Yeah.
So, okay, great.
So that was the news. And I'm
good.
still here.
Yes, you are. Thank you very much for the news, Dan. It's always interesting to talk about some of the stuff that's happening in the world of geekdom and gaming. But let's talk about our main topic today. So our topic is why competitive war games need new additions. It's no stranger to the friends of the show that we play Warhammer, we play Warcry, we play X-Wing, we play, all sorts of different war games. Armada, yeah. I mean, we've got a lot of them. And, war games are an interesting genre in the sense that they are living games, right? And I think that that's what sets them apart from a lot of other games. That's why I don't know if I would totally classify a game like Axis and Allies as a war game. I think it's a strategic game.
Strategic board game.
There's
but
I
games
wouldn't.
where is it all in the box plus expansions in the box and you have everything you need? That feels
Right.
like a board game. If it's a war game, you're putting together rules plus models plus, in many cases, crafting of your own, hobbying of your own, and prepping your pieces for a game where it's not a game where you bring in other players. It's a game where you and your pieces go. You go find somebody else who's done the same thing, which is different from a board game.
And you've got different scenarios, and every game could be very different, right? In fact, usually every game is very different because you don't, you're not set by pre-configured starting positions. You're not set by, pre-configured rules necessarily. There's a lot of flexibility in there, and so I think that poses the challenge, which is, because it is a living game, because war games are living, when do they die and when do they need resurrection?
And why are there so many new editions always coming out? And as gamers, you can just predict that the internet will be mad when you come out with a new edition of anything.
Yes.
And then you'll find a percentage of people who are like, oh, thank goodness, I'm so glad they updated this. Now the game is really going to be great. You can just write the posts now and save them for 2 years when the newer edition comes out. Copy paste it, it'll mean exactly the same thing. And it got me thinking because X-Wing has gone through a major shift, and we don't need to talk about all the ways it's shifted, but the core principle that applies to lots of games, which is, why do we keep fine-tuning games? And I was like, and it brought me to chess. And I'm like, okay, well, chess is it's a finished game, but it didn't start out to be finished.
Right.
That game has been worked on for 1,300 years, right? And the version that we play is only about 200 or 300 years old. But even then, 300 years ago, they were swapping pieces out. Like the queen, before the queen was the queen, it was the vizier, and it was less powerful. And then they came out with the queen because that reflected modern courtly stuff. You had a king and a queen, and the queen had political power, 300 or 400 years ago.
Yep.
And that was a reflection of the time. And the version of chess we play now is called Mad Queen Chess. Because that version of the rules gave the queen all these superpowers. Yeah. And in other versions of the game, the king could jump over more people and do more attacks and stuff like that. And we look at chess as a totally solidly baked game. And it is. Chess is not fundamentally going to change unless you want to experiment with Star Trek 3D chess or anything like that. You can modify it, but the default setting has just been sorted out.
Yeah.
But it happened because human beings kept tweaking with it, right? And we have a long history of people tweaking war games. The Germans were doing war games in the 1780s to the early 1800s. That was the first kind of legit war game that wasn't chess.
Yeah, the Kriegspiel.
Yes, and the purpose of that was to train military officers, was to get them thinking strategically. And so the war game was certainly not a board game like chess where you had two sets of equal pieces. It was, okay, in this scenario, I have this much infantry and this much cavalry and this much artillery, and my opponent would have their own specific to their own thing, it's asymmetric, which is kind of like what we have in war games. We have maybe point values or war scrolls that create some level of game balance, but it's still asymmetric.
Yeah.
H.G. Wells was a huge fan. He published Little Wars in 1913, so he published his own toy soldiers game, with lead toy soldiers that was played out in the backyard, and they would light matches on fire and fire them on spring-loaded things and try to hit other lead pieces, which I think is awesome. The modern war games that we play now kind of have their basis in the 1950s when Charles S. Roberts kind of published the first war game. It was all kind of in one box. The other war games you put your own crap together, but it would be familiar to us as a modern war game. And then this really took off. And that guy, Charles S. Roberts, he founded Avalon Hill. And by the early 1970s, historical war games just took off.
Yep.
And if it wasn't for a decade of historical war games, dozens and dozens they were more like board games than they were our modern war games. You wouldn't really get Warhammer in 1983 and everything that spawned off of Warhammer. And so I think we just keep fine-tuning and fine-tuning and fine-tuning because Warhammer was offering something that those historical war games wasn't. There's a fantasy element. There's the hobbying element in its own way. And it was an open game, right? It's you go buy your army and bring your army. And all of us that play war games now all kind of owe a tip of the hat to Warhammer in 1983. So, but we're still coming out with new Warhammer rules. All the other games that have come since are constantly being tweaked, and it can be maddening as a player, as a collector, as a strategist, that the rules of the game are always moving underneath your feet. So, what kind of things get swapped out from one edition to another? What are some things that come to mind?
So, it's interesting. Let's talk about Warhammer Fantasy. Okay.
Yeah.
So Warhammer Fantasy had been around since the 90s, maybe even late 80s. I think 40K came out before Fantasy did, but it had been around a long time. We got to in 2016. Oh my gosh, I'm going to mess up my dates, and somebody's going to kill me. It was either 2015 or 2016. I think 2016. Warhammer Fantasy Edition came to an end. It was in its 8th edition there, right? So they had gone through 8 iterations of it, and they replaced it with Age of Sigmar.
Right.
Okay, and which was the fantasy models. Some of them were new lines of models. Some of them were new things, right? Like they started coming out with more plastic minis instead of the pewter ones that were out there.
Yep.
So
Plastic
they were
sprues
changing
versus
Yeah, exactly.
metal casts.
Yep. So that was a big change. But if you talk to there's some people who are like, I'm never gonna play Age of Sigmar. I'm only gonna work in Warhammer Fantasy forever and ever and ever. And those are the curmudgeons that we are like, okay, dude, get with the times, right? But it was kind of a big thing because Age of Sigmar sort of botched its rollout when it first came out and didn't really have a competitive aspect to it, which I think turned a lot of people off because there was like a big competitive community in fantasy. But anyway, the point is that you talk to Age of Sigmar people, even the ones that were heavily invested in fantasy, and they say, to a person, they say, Warhammer 8th edition was bloat. It was so bloated that like you had to have like 8 books to like run your thing, right? Like you had the core rules book, you had your army book, you had like 3 or 4 supplements, you had like, you know, the FAQs that had come out that you needed to carry around with you, you had extra data sheets that would like come out, you know, I mean, it was just like over and over and over and over again, and like, and they're just like, it was just so much that it was like impossible to keep up with.
So we call that cruft, right? There's just too much old dead code that in programming.
Like in and I mean that happens. You saw it happen. Warhammer is in its 9th edition right now, Warhammer 40K, and you saw it happen at the end of 8th edition, where, you know, like, this happens pretty often, right? Like you'll get the new edition that comes out, and it's pretty well balanced, right? They've thought through a lot of different things. It's pretty well balanced. And then a new army will get new updates because, you know, you got to keep things fresh. And we can talk about, you know, regular updates and things like that. But a new army gets new updates. And all of a sudden they're like the big bad on the street now because, like, they are optimized for that edition.
Right.
Right? Their rules have been written for that edition, with that edition in mind, and so now, like, they are fully optimized, and compare that to the army whose last rules update were at the beginning of the previous edition, where they are not optimized at all.
Yeah.
There's a huge balance problem that happens right there. But then, you know, and we can talk about balance in a second, but what happens is you get a new, you know, new army rules for that, and then the next army gets rules that help kind of counter the previous army's rules.
They course correct.
Course correct, so that they have like a foil for like how awesome that previous army was, and then you get that over and over and over and over again. And so like Warhammer 40K has got, I don't know, something like, you know, 20 different factions. I don't know. I'm maybe making that up. Mm-hmm. Between the different Space Marine factions, that's probably about right. But you know, you got like 20 different factions, and so you're getting 20 different new rules that are coming out. And by the end of the edition, like, you're just like, holy cow! Like, how does all of this extra rules that have come out, really help the game? So,
and does every game need to just be simplified? And in some cases, that's not the case. In some cases, they'll come out with a new edition, and they'll take something that was a quick, easy rule, and then they'll blow it out and expand it.
That's true.
Like, for instance, in X-Wing, turn order was decided at the very beginning of the game. You know who was going to go first. If you tied, you basically tossed a coin. Other than that, it was the person who bid the lowest points. Now, every round, it could be a different player going first. You have to roll every round, which is exciting, creates the uncertainty. It's added extra steps to the game, but it's actually enhanced the game by adding new design space in there, right? So sometimes you see that happen where they go, you know, maybe the game becomes more complex, but it gives the developers more room to do more interesting stuff down the road.
That's a good point.
Warhammer's unique because they keep coming out with faction-specific rule books.
Right.
And a lot of games that I'm familiar with don't really do that. They'll come out with pieces for the faction, right. But they will, whatever new rule that they've given to one faction, they'll usually give to 2 or 3 other out of 7.
Right.
Right. And so it's not like it's only a thing owned by one faction.
Well, it's because like if you're flying and you've got like ion cannons, well, ion cannons will do something in a game, whether you're a separatist or whether you're a rebel unit or whatever. Ion cannons are ion cannons.
It is what it
period.
is. You slap it on.
Yeah.
And so another thing is that I think, we've talked about it before. There are rules which are kind of like quick cleanup rules or corner case rules, and they don't get fixed, and then they become major strategic plays. So in X-Wing, the idea of bumping, you're doing 3-dimension for 2-dimension, or you're doing 2-dimension for 3-dimension, right? You play on 2-dimensional, a flat plane, but you have to imagine it's 3-dimensional. Well, what happens when one plane flies over another one? You have to have a way of adjudicating. They don't hit each other, but you have to know which one drops where. Well, he's gonna slow down and just be right behind the other guy, adjacent, right?
Yeah.
Well, that became a major strategy for running. So many things came out of that compromise of going from 3D to 2D that it became, now I can fortress my guys in the corner in the beginning of the game and run out the clock. Or I can now fly a big swarm of TIE fighters and I can play the way they bump against each other and keep them in formation. So in the version of 2.5, they had to come up with new bumping rules. Because that was like, okay, well, if we don't want you to bump your own guys anymore. That would be bad. So you're going to start taking damage. And if you bump an opponent, that's a little less, that matters a little less. So now there's 2 rules instead of 1, which makes it harder to judge, right? But nonetheless, they basically said, look, this was a compromise in the very first edition, but now we have to do something different with it because the game needs to grow. And there's things that have been calcified and crufted up. And if you take away that one thing, now suddenly it blows open. A lot of other things blow open.
Yeah.
For instance, like the points I'm going to talk about X-Wing again because it just went through a major change. In the old days, you had 1 bucket of points. I don't know how you guys do war scrolls. I think you guys go find a war scroll. That's your army. You make that army, right? Do you have a little bit of customization?
We got a bucket of points.
You've got a bucket of points, right? You got a bucket of points.
Yeah, you get a bucket of points, and each unit is a point value. So, a unit of 5 of something might be worth 200 points, but a unit of 10 of something might also be worth 200 points. But obviously, that 10 of something is probably smaller and weaker than the unit of 5, right? And so you got to make your strategic decisions there, and but they're all worth a certain amount of points, so you got to add up to 2,000.
Right, and that's the pre-game thing, right?
Yep.
So in X-Wing, your points, they started with 100, then they bumped it to 200. But essentially what you had to do is the chassis you're flying, the pilot you put in that chassis, and any upgrades, an R2 unit, a proton torpedo, all that stuff had different point values. And and it was all in the same bucket. So you were competing against, do I take a 6th ship, right? Or do I break that 6th ship up and then put cooler things on the 5 ships I have?
So I've got 5 better ships.
Right. It was always this pull and tug. And at the end of the day, having a piece on the table was very, very valuable for many players, not the elite players. The elite players could go out with two ships and do what they need to do. But for most folks, sometimes. But now there's 2 different point buckets. There's the buckets. You got 20 points for your chassis, and then every chassis and pilot comes with their own individually determined bucket of loadout points. So
interesting.
Luke can always fly with R2-D2 and a proton torpedo now. In the way the game was designed, you would never want to do that. It was just too big of a waste. It just wouldn't be worth it. Now it's totally worth it if you want to take an expensive piece like Luke. He now comes with all these. He comes with all this headroom that you never had before. At the same time, you could take a cruddy pilot that's just a schlub, a guy that blows up in the background. You can't take that schlub and load him down with, you can't take a TIE bomber and load him down with, 3 different bombs and 2 different torpedoes and all this stuff, right? You cannot, and so that used to be a strategy, right? You take a cheap ship, you pile on all this good gear. Well, this has fundamentally changed how everybody's looking at the game. Now the game's totally different because everything is designed differently, right? You have to say all of my precognitions, that's the wrong word, but all my assumptions about what I need to do to make a good squad are now thrown right out the window because we moved to 2.5.
Yeah.
Because the developer said the game needs to evolve, and this is one way we're going to evolve it. And some people, it's making their head explode, and other people are like, oh my gosh, this is the best thing I've ever seen.
Right. So it's interesting you talk about that, because I think what you're hitting on really is the idea of highlighting like seldom used abilities or rules, right? Like you kind of sometimes game developers want the game to be able to do something.
Right.
And, you know, given the rules as they exist, not a lot of players are doing that thing because it just doesn't make sense in a competitive, in a competitive environment. This happened with Age of Sigmar when they came out with their 3rd edition, which they're in right now. Nobody was using monsters before because it was they're usually costed a little too high. They didn't have much to do on a game. Like
maybe
they
too
were
easy to take down.
But yeah, like they're easy to see. They're kind of big. They're kind of derpy sometimes. Like their war scrolls weren't super powerful. But in the 3rd edition, Warhammer decided to come out with seasons. And right now we're in the first season of AOS 3.0, which is the season of Gur. And if you know anything about the realms in the Age of Sigmar, Gur is the land of monsters. Okay, so what they did is they gave some extra rules for monsters in this. So now they can do some extra damage in certain phases. Now they earn you extra victory points if you have them do certain things in the game. You've got, round by round tactics that you can do, and if you ever do them with a monster, you get a bonus point for that, And so now you can't find a competitive list that doesn't have at least 2 monsters on it.
Right, because now...
because now you need it, and...
They figured out a way using essentially scenarios.
Yep.
And that's where X-Wing has gone too. It used to be you just kill each other. And now it's moved to scenarios. Armada was always scenarios from day one.
Right.
But it was the same thing. It's like you may think that you cannot just devise the best list possible to kill somebody. That is a strategy. It can work. But if you fail at that one strategy, you don't have any others to do your.
Yep.
So it sounds like your monsters were something else, where having the monster gave you an advantage that it doesn't make sense to leave one behind, right?
Yeah, so it completely changed the focus on some of the rules. You know what I mean? Where like they were not being taken, and I think this goes also to we're going to talk about commerce in a little bit, right? Now everybody's out there buying these expensive monster
this is our
units.
segue. This is our segue.
Okay, all right, great. So like these monsters in Age of Sigmar, they're like generally like somewhere between $60 and $170 for this one model, and they're the big ones. They're the tough guys that are out there, and generally they're your like centerpiece models, right? Like you have these armies on a display board. You're gonna put that monster right in the middle because it's an eye catcher,
right?
And so there's a lot of people that have said like, oh, Games Workshop is doing this just so they can sell their models and make more money. And I'm like, well, yeah, I mean they're a company that makes profit, so let's assume that they're going to continue to make profit, but the fact is that nobody was playing with them before, and the fact that everybody is now is kind of interesting,
right? And maybe those products weren't moving, and so from a commerce standpoint, they're like, we're a business first, not a charity first. It's kind of the art versus commerce. When I say art, it's like fun. We do this for fun. We do this for the pure enjoyment, the art of it, while they're doing it because they have to pay their mortgages, right? And they're going to make choices that depend on how many people they can hire or fire in a given quarter. So it's like, hey guys, how come we keep stocking the shelves with all these monsters and people buy them, paint them, and put them on their shelf and just look at them? Which is fine too, but it's not that you're not going to move as many units as if it was like, oh, hey, now you should have one. Don't leave home without your 2 monsters. So I think commerce is a thing, and that goes to backward compatibility. And I've noticed this trend in these games and you keyed on this idea earlier, which is when the game first comes out, when the new edition comes out, all your models are still good, or most of your models are still good, right?
Yeah.
80% of the models, and that's a situation that we have in X-Wing right now. I think about 65% of the models from second edition are good in 2.5. This is the first time they've abandoned models. We've never done that before.
Really?
They're like,
Interesting.
yeah, they've
Okay.
just never done it. It just never. Every model was always playable up until just now. But it's like, okay, so if you're going to have every model in the next version, it's got to be backwards compatible, and all those have to be balanced. And then over time, there becomes power creep, right? Where they want to sell you the next thing, and the next thing, that next thing could give me an edge. And so you're like, well, I got to buy
because
that.
it's more optimized, right?
It's more optimized, yeah.
And it's usually more optimized for the current meta.
Right.
So even if you're in the middle of a new edition, so let's say, in 2 years from now, I'm still working in Age of Sigmar 3.0. If a new army comes out, let's say a new band of orcs comes out, all of a sudden that's going to be optimized for that meta. Not even though it's still 3.0, the beginning of 3.0 is a different game usually than the middle of 3.0.
And the difference is the play testing is done in the hundreds, and the competitives are in the tens of thousands of games.
Yes, exactly.
Right, and there's a very different. No game survives encountering with the players, right? It's like no plan encountered. No plan survives battle with the enemy. That's what's happening here.
Yeah.
Which is and now you have game designers who think they know how the third edition is going to go, but halfway through it, they're like, okay, well, we need to correct some things in the current game, and we need to sell some stuff, and we need to get people excited to buy the new thing. That's the other piece of this puzzle. War games, different than board games. Board games, they kind of want you to get expansions. And expansions kind of feel good, and they're kind of exciting. But it's not the same thing as a war game, where you're like, if I bought this, maybe I'll start winning more. Maybe I'll start making cuts. And maybe my rankings will go up. That's a totally different... And the cost difference between a board game expansion and chasing the meta on like a Games Workshop, we're talking about a factor of times 10, or more.
Yeah.
Between how much cash you're going to lay out to chase the meta.
Right.
And that's what comes into. So, is player investment bad? Right. And we say, is that bad? Is it bad that everybody wants to buy the latest and greatest? Well, if no one ever wanted to buy the latest and greatest, and everybody's playing with their first edition crap, and all the new stuff just collects dust on the shelves, and the game, the friendly local game stores can't move product, well, that's no good either, right?
Right.
That's not healthy for the entire hobby.
Well, and I'm convinced too, by the way, that most war gamers are also collectors at heart.
Yeah, that's true. We want it in case we need it.
And the thing is like I am like a collector of the war bands for Warcry, right?
Yeah.
I want them all.
Yeah, just get them. Don't need them,
even
but
if I never
them.
play them, I want them, right? Yeah. And even for Age of Sigmar, like I've told myself, I want to have at least one nice complete army for each Grand Alliance, which there's Order, Death, Chaos, and Destruction, right? And I've got a Death army in my Night Hunt Ghosts, and I've got a Destruction army in my Orcs. So I'm always kind of on the lookout for those other two. Like, what do I really want to play of those other two? And like, what do I want to get invested in? And so again, collectors at heart. So like the new stuff that comes out, always, I guarantee you, it tickles the community's fancy every time something new comes out because it's shiny, it's new, it's probably got some really good rules in it, right? And like you said, I mean, if you're a meta chaser, like it's got the new rules that could give you an advantage, right? So I think that is, it's important because that is what makes a living game, The idea that there's new stuff coming out that can change the competitive environment. That's what makes it living. A board game with expansions, could you argue that that's a living game? Sure, but really they've got their arc of expansions probably already developed and already sent to China for print.
Right, because if they didn't, people will lose interest.
Right, but once those expansions come out, like they're pretty much done and they've moved on and they're working on the next game, But that's not the case with, these war games. Like you got to keep them fresh, you got to keep them moving, or else they will die on the vine. So, I think that player health, versus the game with new products, I think that it is a balance. But there's always buyers out there, it seems like, for it.
I gotta admit, I'm a sucker for this stuff. I really am.
Mm-hmm.
You find the one thing you want to buy, and it doesn't matter what they come out with. You want. It's the completionist thing. You want to complete. You want to complete. And it's hard to get away from that. It's really, really tough. So, and you find yourself buying stuff that you never play. That's the other problem with gaming like this, is how much stuff are you going to buy that you never actually use? And you're the completionist collector, or are you the person who is spending money for entertainment, like going to the movies or going out to dinner or something like that, right? Which is it?
Right.
It's usually somewhere in the middle, and if you can do both, you're winning. But, at some point in time, there's just throwing money away on plastic, and that feels wrong too. At one side of the extreme, because most people are somewhere in the bell curve, right? We all know there's extreme cases on both sides, but most people are in the bell curve. Like I know somebody who took up Magic the Gathering, and he only got used cards from people. Like he didn't spend a nickel on it. He's like, oh, well, I play white decks, and I kept asking everybody for their trash cards for white. Now, he's not a competitive player, but that's how he plays the game, right? That would be the opposite side of the spectrum of, I'm just going to throw money to make sure I have every card from every set all the time. You never know. So the commerce has to be there, and we cannot rob the businessmen from an honorable business. Is coming out with a new edition before an old edition has seen its full day. Is that dishonorable?
No, I don't think so. I think it depends on why it's coming out, right? Mm-hmm. So let's talk about Age of Sigmar 2.0, right? You could make the argument that it was not 100% ready for a new edition because not every army had gotten an update in Age of Sigmar 2.0.
Okay.
Right? Some of the rules were still holdouts from the first edition.
Oh, okay,
you know what I mean?
Okay.
And maybe they had gotten like a little bit of a refresh in a White Dwarf, which is Games Workshop's monthly publication.
Yep.
And you can like buy the White Dwarf, and sometimes there's like little rules updates in there, and so. But there was a couple of armies that hadn't been updated since 1.0, right? And so you could say, okay, well, why? We're not going to get a new edition until this comes out. Really, I think if you can examine the necessity of it, right? And I'm using Age of Sigmar 2.0 as an example. They had come out in 2019 with a bunch of rules that we termed the activation wars. Mm-hmm. And so what happens when you play Age of Sigmar is that when you get into combat, right, like the melee combat, it is you pick a unit, I pick a unit, you pick a unit, I pick a unit, you pick a unit, I pick a unit, right, back and forth.
Yep. We had this with Armada.
Yeah, exactly. So they started coming out with some rules for certain units that said, once you enter at the beginning of the combat phase, this unit can fight first.
Right. They can. Right. They can mess with the standard order of operations.
Exactly. And so all of a sudden, each phase had a beginning, a middle, and an end. And now each of those parts had a beginning and a beginning. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because it's like, well, if I have a unit that can fight first and you have a unit that can fight first, well, which one can fight first, right? And so it was like you were trying to find those units that could fight first because, for example, if I was taking a unit of 5 horsemen into a unit of 10 footmen, for example, I want to hit those footmen as hard as I can so that only 2 of them are swinging back at me when it's their turn.
Yeah.
right? So there's definite advantage into going first because like a good offense is a good defense kind of type of thing. And so you started having these activation wars that were just getting silly.
Yeah.
And like so they had these like, okay, well, these people can strike first. These people can strike first. You know what I mean?
Well,
and then they had
and the whole idea that one guy would fight then another is just a contrivance of the fact that we can't run simultaneous units on a board game.
Right, exactly.
And they're just playing with the the fix is everybody takes a turn, and then they turn the fix into a strategy. And we've seen that a lot of places in a game.
Yeah, and then they started messing with like, oh well, this one has an ability where you can't go until very last. You know, so like the rules started getting super complicated with that, right?
Yeah.
And this is where some of the bloat came in. This is where some of the rules like needed to be simplified because it was just getting a little too complicated. And so they came out with a 3rd edition, but some of the armies had not been updated. But I think if you asked across the community, was this the right move to do? Everybody will give you a resounding yes.
Because they'd rather have a fair game.
Yeah, they wanted a more balanced game that had more simple, clear rules than they were worried about it being a cash grab.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So I think that was the biggest differentiator right there. Is like, why are you coming out with a new edition? Is it just because you're like, well, it's been exactly 1 year and it's time to put out a new edition so that we can get this money again?
Cash in.
You know? And I think that it's funny because you see board games kind of do this a little bit, right? We just talked about a Dune game getting a refresh and a reboot with a new movie logo on it that will probably sell more because it looks more updated.
Right.
You know? And it's pretty much the same game just with a new edition label slapped on it, right? Because it has new artwork in it. So... you know, war games aren't exclusively the ones that will go out and do a new edition. You know, you see it in books, you see it in board games, you see it in video games, you see it all that kind of stuff. I think it just comes across as it happening a little bit more often with war games because they are living games. You know, like it doesn't happen once every 30 years. Like maybe you get a new new Axis and Allies version in 20 more years from now, you know, like okay, but like with, you know, Warhammer, it's going to happen every 3 years roughly. So Dan, you know, games don't necessarily have to wait for a new edition to update themselves though, right?
No, they don't. But I would say the health of any game should be measured based on its ability to accept new players.
Right.
So sometimes an FAQ is good enough. Sometimes a banned list will do the trick. I know Magic the Gathering uses banned lists a lot.
Yeah.
Once they find a broken combo they weren't expecting, they have to go in and ban cards, and that's a pretty easy thing to do. It's harder with models that people have invested money and time into. Versus, I know cards are worth a lot of money too, but somehow models get treated different than rectangular pieces of cardboard for some reason. But if your game is at a point where interest is dying and sales are down and organized events are are losing attendance, that's when you have to recalibrate.
Right.
And so does that always mean a new edition? Maybe. Sometimes. That would really help. What a new edition can do is you get to wipe the meta clean.
Yeah.
And you don't get a new edition regularly, so you better make good use of it, right? So if you're going to wipe the meta clean, you better start bringing in as many new people into tournaments as you possibly can and say, hey, we're all just figuring this thing out together. Let's figure it out. Versus a game that's gotten real calcified and there's elite players and the people who are in the top 10 are in the top 10 and it's really hard to break in. That is not a growth path for most of these war games.
Right.
Because if the company's going to continue to sell you stuff, they have to give you a shot, a fair shot.
Yep.
And if the game has reached a point where you don't feel like it's fair, or you invested in the wrong thing, and no matter how hard you try, the thing you put your money into isn't going to win, then guess what? You're going to move on to something else. I know a lot of people that have dropped games and just gone completely away from competitive war games and jumped at RPGs. And they just said, we're tired of this. We're just tired of this rat race. We're going to go play D&D. I know whole podcasts that went down where like the podcast was to talk about, it was the main podcast for a particular war game that everybody listened to. And all the players just gave up one day and said, well, we're just doing D&D. And so what does that say about the health of that game, right?
Yeah.
Because it got to a point where the company wasn't they were deprioritizing that product line. They were releasing new product lines. And it became too much shampoo, rinse, repeat.
Right.
Where the same things went over and over again. And that means it's time to rethink the game. That means it's time to, like, the chess pieces had to be refined over 1,300 years. And guess what? The king was too powerful and the vizier was not powerful enough. That had to be balanced out to get the game we have today.
Yeah. And I think it's important, too, that, you'll get... This happens a lot with Warhammer 40K. In fact, they just recently updated they call them data slates now, right? And that kind of goes into their lore of, like, data slates. And so they're updating and balancing the game every 3 months, according to them, right? Which is pretty often. But the thing is they've got a treasure trove of data coming out every weekend. There's a tournament somewhere that's providing data on, like, who's a strong faction, like who's winning, what's the meta list, what's going on. And so I think that you can't discount the FAQs or the erratas or like the points rebalancing that you get very often within an edition, because what that does is it keeps the game from being too broken.
Yeah.
Right. And just as you said that it's important to make sure that your game is accessible to everybody. If I go in and I'm like, oh man, I love these models, and I buy that army, and then I go against an army that is just absolutely broken, I'm going to be like, I quit. This is so
I'm done.
stupid.
I wasted my money.
And you know how it is. The meta will come and go, right? Like, it's cyclical.
Mm-hmm.
What's good today may not be that good in 3 months, etc. And it's up to, like, good generals is what we call them, right? Good players will know how to ride through those metas with the list that they have instead of chasing it, a lot of times.
Well, and sometimes you can check out because the meta, and there's, like, let's say X-Wing introduced 2 new factions, right? They introduced the Separatists and the Republic. And some of us who were already 5 factions deep were like, I'm not buying 2 more.
Right.
And then they started winning. And then it was like, well, you guys suck.
Yeah.
It made it really hard to get enthusiastic about the game when it just seemed like you just had to chase the flavor of the month.
Yeah,
and that
definitely.
is like you said, good generals will just play their thing and they know how to use their pieces. But most of us in the bell curve, in the middle, and in the back, in the fat and in the back of the bell curve, suck just a little.
Yeah.
Right. And so managing the expectation of a new player, managing the expectation of your most elite players, I do not understand how these game designers can sleep at night, because there's no way they're going to make everybody happy. It's almost impossible.
It's true.
It's a fool's errand.
Yeah.
Which is why I rattled off this list of wargaming history going back 1,300 years, because everybody keeps trying to turn the screws on this to get it right. And it never will be.
Well, and I think that might be the dirty little secret, right? That's the Dread Pirate Robert secret of this whole thing, right?
Oh, yeah.
Which is that there's no one Dread Pirate Robert. It's like there's a lot of them. And so, the thing is like, as they come out with editions, and I've learned this with Age of Sigmar, especially with their 3rd edition that they've come out, right? They're turning the screws to make things interesting and not perfect necessarily. And I think that is an interesting take on this, because we all know that it's not going to ever be perfect. Like anyone who's really serious about wargaming knows that it will never be perfect, right? There's always going to be a strong meta. There's always going to be a weak meta. There's always going to be a strong army. There's always going to be a weak army. And again, it's cyclical. Like it'll change. You know, I talked about our friend Sergio. He used to play Legion of Nagash, which was like a lot of ghosts and skeletons and stuff like that, and he completely switched because like the meta just crumbled out from under him, and like that army is hot garbage now, and he needed something else. Like it's really, even though he's a really good general, it's really, really hard to be competitive with that army because it just kind of fell away. So he's like, I want to try something different. So he found another army that I think you have to be, in my opinion, a very good general to use that army, and he's a good one, and so he's doing really well with it, you know. But the point being is that things change, and I think that if we understand that these are imperfect games that are, you know, they're pulling different levers to, I think, get different experiences out of the sessions, and they're always trying to make it better, but sometimes it has to get a little worse to get a little better. Sometimes that's when you need a new edition, and it'll feel worse at first, but then it makes a lot of sense. It's funny because Warhammer 40K is in their 9th edition. It's been out for 2 years now almost, and they're looking at the seasons that
Sigmar has.
Age of Sigmar is doing, and they're kind of like a little jealous of it because they're seeing that you can start pulling some different levers that make the game a little bit more interesting within the meta, you know.
I've seen different companies farm team ideas. Like they'll say, hey, we'll take a smaller, a less profitable business line. We'll dink around with the rules, see if we get a better result, and then bring that into the big line, which is the big money maker. And it makes total sense why they would do that. You know, it's less risky. So how often should editions come out? I think we answered that question, which is to keep the game viable, you better come up with a new edition, and you have to please both ends of the bell curve. And sometimes that's what that requires, you know.
So I think with Warhammer, it's every 3 years. I mean, if I were to put like a kind of back of the napkin math on this, and the reason it's that much is because it takes them that amount of time to get through the factions with some updated rules, right. And by the time they kind of come back around and like, okay, 90% of our factions have updated rules. It's now time to think about a new edition that may streamline this, right? So I'll be interested to see, though. I told you, they're kind of doing this seasons thing. Yeah. Essentially, I think this next summer they're coming out with season 2. And I have no idea what it is. There's a lot of speculation about it, but that's almost kind of a new mini edition.
Yeah.
Right? It's definitely going to be 3.1,
right.
And so, like, will that be enough to keep the game super fresh, keep it interesting, and players aren't clamoring for new rules? I think that it'll be interesting.
And we've been talking a lot about X-Wing 2.5, and even though they don't it's 2.5 is a colloquialism, right? The fans just named the latest version 2.5.
Right.
It's really like a 2.8 or a 2.9 because it's that big of a change. But it's still a lot of the core things that work in 2.0 still work, right? There's still like 80% of the fundamentals of the game are way intact.
Yeah.
And that's where you don't have to, there's still you got to look at the ratio of baby to bathwater.
Yeah.
It's like, what is working with this game? And are we complaining about it because we've got nit-nats and meta problems? Or are we complaining about it because there's some fundamentals? Or if you look at the way the game is played today versus how we designed it in 1.0, has it gotten weird? Like you had mentioned in Sigmar that ranged was where it was at. If you were not doing ranged, you weren't winning. Well, it sounds like from the IP and from the lore, hand-to-hand and melee should be more common than ranged, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
So that means that's a telltale sign that something's got to give.
Right. Yeah, definitely. To kind of bring this full circle, I think that new additions are a great thing to the game. I know some people can kind of complain about them, like, oh, this is a money grab. But you had talked about it earlier being an opportunity for new players to get in. I know I started a Space Marine army in Warhammer 9th edition. That's the first time I played 40K. And it was good. Like I had a good time with it. I realized that I liked Age of Sigmar a little bit better. I thought it was a little less complicated than 40K. And so I'm going to kind of stick with Sigmar, but I still have, a Space Marine army that I'll probably play with if somebody wants to play 40K with me in the future.
Yeah.
Probably more narrative stuff, right? Because I don't know if I want to wade into the competitive area. But the fact is that new edition got me into 40K because it was a great opportunity to learn the rules and, have other people teach me because, it was new. So
Yeah.
I welcome them.
If you're going to be a war gamer, and I think a lot of people have been, everybody, when I started playing X-Wing, everyone was complaining about Games Workshop because everyone had felt, everybody who had ran away from Games Workshop into the arms of FFG X-Wing had nothing good to say about the way Games Workshop was treating their players.
Yeah.
And
which, by the way, is probably very true.
It was probably there was a lot of truth to it. Now, I was on the other side of the border of that conflict, going, well, that doesn't affect me, but at the same time, if you think about it, you've got to keep your customers happy, or there won't be customers anymore.
Yeah.
And X-Wing blew up. The growth curve on it was nuts, and the folks that had done some research on it, most of those people had been playing 40K and stopped.
Right.
And that gave that game a huge shot in the arm that it's still drafting off of today. It's not growing like that anymore. Yeah. But guess what? Guess what's growing again? 40K.
Right.
And because they've decided that maybe we should listen to our customers. Maybe we have to optimize this experience because they're really selling an experience. The painting, the strategic planning, the list building, the getting out and playing in tournaments, it's the whole package. Mm-hmm. And if one of those pieces of the package ain't working, then they're going to lose money. And that means they got to let people go. Yeah. That's, we don't talk about that side of things very often. But when bad choices get made in game design and people stop spending money, then human beings get fired and have to go find other jobs.
Yeah.
So anyway, we have beat this topic to death, Justin. But yes, games need to change. They need to live. Living games are good. Additions are good. We should embrace the future. Enjoy the past. It took me a long time to throw away a lot of the tokens and cards I had from X-Wing 1.0. I had a lot of it, and I had a trash party. I posted photos of it on Discord, and people were like, you shouldn't have done that. I'm like, yes, I should have. Yes, I should have. Sometimes just throw it away and point the boat towards the horizon in the future. Don't kill yourself living in the past. I feel bad for those guys playing those old games where it's just them and their pals, and no one's getting it. No one new was getting into it.
And that's it, right? Like, there's no new models coming out for it. There's no new rules coming out for it. They're just kind of stuck. They're basically the Amish of gaming at this point, right? Like,
every game has those. There's guys still playing the Star Wars Decipher customizable card game. That game has been out of print for
there's guys still playing.
Years.
There's guys still playing. D&D ADD, right?
Yeah,
AD&D. So,
yeah. No, I've talked to some DMs that are like, I do not want to learn any new rules, and I'm like, I have so many rule systems in my head. I get it now. I'm halfway done with my 40s. My brain was learning the Star Trek Modiphius system has really hurt my brain. I remember being a young 14-year-old kid. I could plow through an RPG book and go, yep, I could run this tomorrow. Not over 40 brain. It does not want to learn these things.
The problem is I'll learn a new system and then I'll go to play it and I'll be like, yeah, sure, like, go ahead and take that boon. Like, whoops,
Yeah, why
that's
not?
not even part of the system anymore, but we're going to roll with it,
And who cares?
Yeah, exactly. Well, Dan, thank you for bringing up this topic. I thought it was really good to talk about, some of these new additions and why we have them and where we go with them. And, the hardest part of it is just making sure that you get caught up with the new rules, right?
Yeah.
And that's where, having a local community, a local gaming chat, game room chat helps a lot. I know that I've learned a lot of the rules just from hearing people being like, "What? Can you believe that they changed this?" I'm like, "Oh, that's an interesting change."
Yeah.
Just by kind of staying plugged in with the community and understanding where they're coming from, I know that it's helped me a lot. Stay current and stay, a little bit more relevant as things change out from under my feet, basically.
And it's good for us to bring in our different perspectives, right? We can talk about a specific game like Warcry, and then we can stand back and say, what are the common elements between this war game and that war game, this skirmish game and that skirmish game?
Yeah.
And there's a lot of commonalities. There's way more. We have way more in common than we have any differences.
Yeah, for sure.
Quite plainly.
For sure. Well, thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, for listening to our show. Give us a like. Give us a subscribe. Share it with your friends on social media. Everything that you guys do for us totally helps us out. So go onto our Facebook page or Twitter. Find us at Tabletop and Beyond. Facebook.com/Tabletop and Beyond. Our Twitter handle is @Tabletop and Beyond. Hit us up. Let us know if there's any topics that you'd like to hear about in terms of board games, war games, and beyond. So we'd love to hear from you.
Yeah,
thank you, everybody. And
we need more ideas. we're about 70 plus episodes in, and we're like, Dan can't talk about being a good GM anymore. We are done.
Now we've got some good stuff coming up, but we just want to make sure that what we're talking about is definitely hitting on what you guys are interested in. So if there's something specific you'd like to hear, just let us know. So thank you very much, and have a good night, everybody.
To Tabletop and Beyond.